The doctors gave Julian's son 7 days to live, and all his billions couldn't buy a single hour more until a forgotten boy from the streets offered what no amount of money could, his own fragile life. Before we start, if you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and drop your city in the comments so I know who's riding with me. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The sterile white of Dr. Patel's office seemed to swallow the sound itself. Julian Cross sat rigid in the leather chair, his $1,000 suit suddenly feeling like a costume, something he'd put on to play the part of a man in control. Across the mahogany desk, Dr. Patel's mouth was moving, forming words that Julian's brain refused to process. 7 days. Those two words finally broke through. I'm sorry, Mr. Cross. We've exhausted every conventional option. The condition is extremely aggressive. Without a bone marrow transplant from a compatible donor, and given the speed of deterioration. Dr. Patel's voice softened, becoming almost gentle. 7 days. Perhaps 10 if we're fortunate. I recommend you spend this time. No. Julian's voice came out strangled. No, that's not. I have resources. I'll fly in specialists from Switzerland, from Tokyo. Mr. Cross. Dr. Patel leaned forward, his eyes carrying the weight of too many conversations like this one. I understand, but some things exist beyond the reach of even your considerable means. I'm truly sorry. Julian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against imported tile. Through the window behind Dr. Patel, he could see the city he'd conquered, his company's logo on 3 different skyscrapers, each one a monument to his intelligence, his drive, his refusal to accept limitations, but none of them mattered now. In the pediatric recovery room down the hall, 8-year-old Nathaniel Cross lay propped against pillows, an IV line trailing from his too thin arm. His dark hair, so like Julian's own, had begun to thin. His skin held a translucent quality that made Julian's chest constrict every time he looked at him. Dad. Nathaniel's voice was small, curious rather than afraid. What did Dr. Patel say? Julian arranged his face into something he hoped resembled confidence. He'd built a tech empire on his ability to project certainty, to convince investors and competitors alike that he always had the winning move planned 3 steps ahead. This was different. He said, we're going to try some new approaches, buddy. Different doctors, different treatments. Julian sat on the edge of the hospital bed, careful not to jostle the IV. You know, your old man, I never take no for an answer. Nathaniel studied him, with eyes too, knowing for 8 years. Am I dying? The question landed like a physical blow. Julian had faced hostile boardrooms, corporate sharks, journalists who'd tried to destroy him with a single published word. None of it had prepared him for the unflinching honesty in his son's gaze. No, Julian lied, hating himself for it. No, Nate, I won't let that happen. 3 miles away, in an alley behind Street Catherine's hospital, a different kind of desperation played out in silence. Elias didn't remember his last real meal. Tuesday? Wednesday? The days blurred together when you counted them in hunger pangs rather than hours. He crouched behind the dumpster designated for hospital cafeteria waste, his thin frame folded into practiced invisibility. The guard usually came by at 6 p.m. Elias had learned his patterns over the past month, ever since the shelter on Morrison Street had closed, and he'd been forced to find new hunting grounds. The trick was timing. Too early, and the bags hadn't been set out yet. Too late, and the rats got there first. His stomach cramped, a familiar agony. 14 years old, and he'd become an expert in calculating the odds of sealed containers versus the risk of food poisoning, the mathematics of survival. A sound made him freeze, not the guard's heavy boots, but something else, a soft, whimpering. Elias peered around the dumpster's corner and saw a small dog, some kind of terrier mix, its paw caught in a discarded wire hanger. Hey, Elias whispered, approaching slowly. Hey, it's okay. The dog growled, terrified, but Elias had learned the language of fear. He'd spoken it fluently since his mother had died 4 years ago, leaving him to navigate the city's indifferent streets alone. "I know," he murmured, kneeling despite the broken glass that pressed into his knees through his worn jeans. "I know you're scared, but I'm going to help you, okay? I promise." It took 10 minutes of patient coaxing before the dog let him close enough to untangle the wire. When it finally limped free, it didn't run. Instead, it pressed against Elias's leg, and he felt something in his chest crack open some pocket of warmth he'd thought had frozen solid years ago. "You're hungry too, huh?" Elias glanced at the dumpster, then back at the dog. "Let's see what we can find." They ate together in the alley's shadows, stale bread rolls, a half-eaten sandwich, some wilted lettuce that was probably meant for compost. The dog ate like it was the finest steak, and Elias smiled despite everything. "At least one of us should have a good night," he told the dog, who thumped its tail against the concrete. The hospital's back door swung open, and Elias instinctively pulled deeper into the shadows. A man emerged, expensive suit, expensive shoes, the kind of person who moved through the world like he owned it. But there was something wrong with his posture, something broken in the way he leaned against the wall and pressed his palms against his eyes. Elias had seen that posture before. The body language of grief. The man pulled out his phone, his voice carrying in the evening air. "Thompson, I need you to contact every transplant center on the eastern seaboard. I don't care what it costs. Find me options. Find me a miracle." A pause. "I know what the database says. I'm telling you, it's not good enough. Keep looking." The man ended the call and just stood there, this tower of wealth and power, looking more lost than Elias felt on his worst nights. Then a smaller figure appeared in the doorway, a boy, maybe 8 or 9, hospital bracelet visible even from Elias's hiding spot. The boy moved slowly, carefully, like each step required thought. "Dad?" the boy called softly. "Mom's calling. She wants to talk to you." The man, the father, turned, and Elias saw his face transform. Whatever despair had been there vanished behind a mask of false confidence. "Of course, Nate. Let's go back inside. Can we walk a little first? Just to the end of the hallway? I'm tired of that room." The father hesitated, then nodded. They moved together toward the parking lot's edge, and something made Elias follow, staying in the shadows but drawn by an instinct he couldn't name. "Dad," the boy said, his voice almost lost in the city's ambient noise. If the treatments don't work, will it hurt?" The father stopped walking. His shoulders tensed. "Nate, it's okay to tell me. I won't be scared if you're honest." Elias watched as the man knelt down, eye level with his son, and for a moment, the expensive suit and the hospital gown didn't matter. They were just a father and son standing on the edge of something terrible, holding on to each other because it was all they had left. "I don't know, buddy," the father said, his voice breaking, "but I promise you won't face it alone. Whatever happens, I'm right here." The boy nodded, accepting this truth with a grace that made Elias's throat tight. They embraced, and Elias turned away, feeling like he'd witnessed something sacred. The dog whined softly, pressing against his leg. "Yeah," Elias whispered. "I know." He didn't know why this mattered to him, one privileged kid among millions, one family's tragedy in a world full of them. But something in the father's broken posture, in the boy's quiet courage, had lodged itself under Elias's ribs. As father and son returned to the hospital, Elias stayed in the shadows, an invisible witness to suffering that made his own seem smaller somehow. The lights of the hospital burned against the darkening sky, and somewhere inside those walls, a family was counting down their final days. Elias looked at the dog, still sitting faithfully beside him. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's find somewhere safe for tonight." But as he turned to leave, he glanced back one more time at the hospital entrance, at the building that held a dying boy and his desperate father. Something told him this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. Something told him that 7 days was about to become the most important week of his life. If you had only 7 days left with someone you loved, what would you want to tell them? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your words might mean more than you know. The next 72 hours blurred into a desperate marathon of phone calls, consultations, and increasingly futile hope. Julian had converted his penthouse office into a war room. 3 screens displayed international transplant databases, experimental treatment protocols, and real-time updates from medical researchers he'd hired at astronomical rates. His assistant, Thompson, had stopped going home. The coffee maker ran continuously. "Mr. Cross," Thompson said carefully, entering with another stack of files. "The team in Berlin says the treatment protocol would take 6 weeks minimum to show results, and the specialist from Johns Hopkins won't work." Julian didn't look up from his screen. "Nate doesn't have 6 weeks. What about the bone marrow registry? Any updates?" "Still searching. But sir, the odds of finding a compatible, unrelated donor in this time frame." Thompson trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Julian's jaw tightened. "Then we expand the search. Every database, every registry, every possible..." His phone buzzed. The hospital. His heart stopped. "Cross here. Mr. Cross, it's Nurse Chen. Nathaniel's asking for you. He's having a difficult morning." Julian was already grabbing his coat. "I'm on my way." The hospital had become Nathaniel's prison, though he never complained. Julian found him in the playroom, a cruelly cheerful space with bright murals and toys that seemed to mock the reality of the children who played there. Most of them wouldn't live to see high school. Nathaniel sat at a table by the window, drawing with colored pencils. His hand trembled slightly, a new symptom that Dr. Patel had warned would worsen. "Hey, buddy." Julian sat down beside him, careful to keep his voice light. "What you working on?" Nathaniel held up the drawing. It showed a house, not the penthouse where they lived, but something smaller, warmer. A family stood in front. A man, a boy, and strangely, a dog. "We don't have a dog," Julian observed. "I know." Nathaniel set the drawing down carefully. "But I always wanted one. You said we'd get one when things were less busy." The guilt hit Julian like a freight train. How many times had he said that? How many, when things are less busy, promises had he made and broken? He'd been building an empire while his son had been building dreams around the edges of Julian's absence. "After you're better," Julian said, his throat tight, "we'll get a dog, any kind you want." Nathaniel looked at him with those 2 knowing eyes. "Dad, you don't have to pretend. I heard Dr. Patel talking to the nurses. I know about the 7 days." Julian felt the world tilt. "Nate, it's okay." Nathaniel's voice was steady, braver than Julian deserved. "I'm not mad. I don't want to spend the time we have pretending everything's fine. I want it to be real." Julian pulled his son close, breathing in the antiseptic smell of hospital shampoo, feeling the fragile cage of ribs beneath his small frame. "Okay," he whispered. "Real. No more pretending." They sat like that for a long moment, father and son, holding on to each other while time ticked mercilessly forward. "Can we go outside?" Nathaniel asked. "Just for a little bit? I want to see the sky." The hospital had a small courtyard, barely more than a patch of grass and a few benches, surrounded by brick walls, but it was outside, and the late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of a struggling maple tree. Julian pushed Nathaniel's wheelchair along the path, moving slowly. Each step felt weighted with significance, like he was trying to memorize the feel of the handles, the sound of the wheels, the warmth of the sun. "Dad, look!" Nathaniel pointed toward the corner of the courtyard, where the wall met an alley. A boy crouched there, partially hidden in shadow, thin, dressed in clothes that had seen better years, dark hair falling across his face. He was feeding something. The small dog Julian had glimpsed beside him wagged its tail enthusiastically. "He's been there before," Nathaniel said quietly. "I've seen him from my window. He shares his food with the dog." Julian frowned. Hospital security was usually good about keeping the homeless population away from the medical campus. Not out of cruelty, necessarily, but regulation, liability. The boy looked up, sensing their attention. His eyes met Julian's across the courtyard, dark, wary, carrying the kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Julian saw what society had taught him to see: poverty, risk, someone outside the boundaries of his carefully controlled world. But Nathaniel saw something different. "He looks hungry," Nathaniel said. Then, before Julian could stop him, he called out, "Hey, do you want some food? My dad can get you something from the cafeteria." The boy's eyes widened. He stood slowly, like prey ready to bolt. The dog pressed against his leg. "Nate, we should," Julian began, but Nathaniel was already waving the boy over. "It's okay," Nathaniel said. "We're friendly." The boy hesitated, then walked toward them with careful steps. Up close, Julian could see he was older than he'd first appeared, maybe 13 or 14, but malnourishment had kept him small. His eyes, though, held something ancient. "I'm Nathaniel," his son said, with the easy confidence of a child who'd never learned to fear strangers. "What's your name?" "Elias." The boy's voice was quiet, unused to conversation. "Cool, dog. What's its name?" "Doesn't have one yet. Just found him yesterday." Nathaniel grinned. "Can I pet him?" Elias nodded, and the dog approached cautiously. Nathaniel reached out from his wheelchair, and the animal seemed to sense his gentleness, pressing into his hand. "He likes you," Elias observed. "I like him too." Nathaniel looked up at his father. "Dad, can we get Elias some food, please?" Julian wanted to say no, wanted to protect his son from what? From a hungry boy? From reality? But Nathaniel was looking at him with such hope, such simple human kindness, that Julian found himself nodding. "Wait here," he said stiffly. "I'll be right back." He returned 15 minutes later with a bag from the cafeteria sandwiches, fruit, chips, juice boxes. More than one person could eat in a sitting, but something in Elias's hollow cheeks made Julian pack extra. Elias took the bag with trembling hands. "Thank you," he whispered. "It's no problem," Nathaniel said. "My dad's rich. He can afford it." Julian winced at the casual revelation, but Elias didn't react the way he expected. No calculation, no sudden shift in demeanor, just quiet gratitude. "Why are you in a wheelchair?" Elias asked, then quickly added, "Sorry, that's probably rude." "It's okay," Nathaniel shrugged with practiced ease. "I'm sick. The doctors say I only have about a week left." The words came out so simply, stated like fact rather than tragedy. Elias went very still. "A week?" he repeated. "Yeah, unless they find someone with matching bone marrow who can donate. But that's pretty rare, so..." Nathaniel trailed off, petting the dog. "Are you scared too?" The question hung in the air. Julian realized his son had been asking it of everyone, the nurses, the doctors, his mother on the phone. "Are you scared too?" Looking for someone who would tell him the truth? Elias sat down on the bench beside the wheelchair. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'm scared all the time." "Of what?" "Lots of things. Being hungry, winter coming, never mattering to anyone." Nathaniel nodded like this made perfect sense. "I'm scared of the dark now, and pain, and..." He looked at Julian, then back at Elias. "And leaving my dad alone." Julian felt something break in his chest. His son's fear wasn't for himself, it was for Julian. This 8-year-old boy, facing his own mortality, was worried about his father's loneliness. "He won't be alone," Elias said with surprising firmness. "He has his work, right? And friends?" Nathaniel's silence was answer enough. The three of them sat there in the courtyard, an unlikely triangle: wealth, poverty, and innocence, connected by the simple truth that none of them knew how to face what was coming. "Would you come visit me again?" Nathaniel asked Elias. "I get lonely in my room." Elias glanced at Julian, clearly expecting rejection, but Julian found himself nodding. "The courtyard's open until 8, he said quietly. "If you're around, I'll be here," Elias promised. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Julian watched his son and this street boy talk about dogs, favorite colors, and what stars might look like up close. Two children from opposite worlds, finding common ground in their fear and honesty. When a nurse came to bring Nathaniel back inside for evening medications, Elias stood, clutching his bag of food. "Thank you," he said again, this time looking directly at Julian. "For the food, and For, for letting me talk to him. Julian wanted to say something meaningful, something that acknowledged the strange gift this boy had given Nathaniel, the gift of being seen, being heard, being understood. But the words wouldn't come. "See you tomorrow?" Nathaniel called, as the nurse wheeled him toward the door. "Yeah," Elias said. "Tomorrow." That night, Julian couldn't sleep. He stood at his penthouse window, looking down at the city lights, thinking about a boy who shared his only food with a stray dog. A boy who admitted his fear instead of hiding it behind money and power. His phone buzzed. Thompson, with another update on the donor search. Still nothing. 5 days left. Julian closed his eyes and saw Nathaniel's drawing, the small house, the family, the dog. Such simple dreams. Why had he thought the penthouse and the empire mattered more? Somewhere out there, in the city's dark corners, Elias was probably huddled in an alley, trying to stay warm. And tomorrow, he'd come back to sit with a dying boy and offer the one thing Julian's billions couldn't buy: honest, unafraid companionship. Julian pressed his forehead against the cold glass and wondered what it meant that a homeless child understood his son better than he did. 5 days left, and somewhere in the universe's cruel mathematics, there had to be an answer he was missing. The next morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Day 5 of 7, Julian sat in Dr. Patel's office again, this time with a team of specialists video conferencing in from around the world. Tokyo, London, Boston, experts whose combined consultation fees could have funded a small hospital for a year. "The experimental treatment from Germany shows promise," Dr. Yamamoto said from his screen. "But the earliest we could begin would be 3 weeks. The protocol requires—" "He doesn't have 3 weeks," Julian interrupted, his voice sharp. "What about the synthetic marrow research from Stanford?" "Still in animal trials," Dr. Patel said gently. "Mr. Cross, I understand your frustration, but—" "You don't understand." Julian stood abruptly, pacing. "You don't understand what it's like to watch your child slip away while everyone tells you there's nothing to be done. I built a company from nothing. I solved problems everyone said were impossible. There has to be." "Julian." Dr. Patel's use of his first name stopped him. "Sit down, please." Julian sat, suddenly exhausted. "The bone marrow registry is global," Dr. Patel continued. "Millions of potential donors. The algorithm is searching constantly for compatible matches based on Nathaniel's specific genetic markers. But the reality is that finding a match is rare, and finding one quickly enough." He spread his hands helplessly. "I wish I had better news." "So we wait," Julian said bitterly. "We just wait and hope." "We wait and hope," Dr. Patel confirmed. "And we make sure Nathaniel is comfortable, that he's surrounded by love. Sometimes that's all we can do." Julian wanted to throw something, to rage against the unfairness of a universe where all his power meant nothing. But instead, he just nodded and left. In Nathaniel's room, morning cartoons played on mute. His son was awake but listless. The energy from yesterday's courtyard visit depleted. An untouched breakfast tray sat on the bedside table. "Hey, buddy," Julian said, forcing brightness into his voice. "Not hungry?" "My stomach hurts," Nathaniel said quietly. "Dr. Patel says that's normal." Normal. Such a clinical word for his child's body failing. "The specialists think they might have found something promising," Julian lied, unable to stop himself. "A treatment from Germany that—" "Dad," Nathaniel looked at him with those impossibly mature eyes. "Remember what we said? Real. No pretending." Julian's carefully constructed facade crumbled. He sat on the edge of the bed, taking his son's small hand in his. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to just accept it." "Maybe you don't have to accept it," Nathaniel said. "Maybe you just have to be here with me. That's all I want." A knock at the door interrupted them. Nurse Chen poked her head in. "Sorry to disturb, Mr. Cross, but there's a situation in the courtyard that requires your attention." Julian found Elias backed into a corner of the courtyard, a security guard looming over him. The boy's dog growled protectively. though the sound was more desperate than threatening. "I told you yesterday," the guard was saying. "You can't loiter on hospital property. I'm calling the police." "Wait." Julian's voice cut across the courtyard. "He's with me." The guard turned, surprised. "Mr. Cross, hospital policy is clear about." "I said he's with me." Julian walked closer, seeing the fear in Elias's eyes, the way he was calculating escape routes. "He's a friend of my son's." The guard looked skeptical, but backed off. "Sir, if there's any trouble." "There won't be." Julian waited until the guard left, then turned to Elias. "Why are you back here?" Elias straightened, trying for dignity despite his obvious fear. "Nathaniel asked me to come. I keep my promises." Something in his tone, the fierce pride underlying the fear, reminded Julian of himself at that age. Before the money, before the empire, when all he'd had was stubborn determination and the refusal to be dismissed. "He's having a rough day," Julian said, surprising himself. "But I think seeing you would help." Elias's expression shifted from defensive to concerned. "Is he worse?" Julian nodded, unable to speak. "Can I see him?" Elias asked. "Just for a minute?" Every instinct, Julian had screamed, "No." This boy was a stranger, from a world Julian had spent his entire life trying to escape. He represented everything Julian had fought, against poverty, powerlessness, the randomness of suffering. But Nathaniel had smiled yesterday. For the first time in weeks, he'd smiled. "Come on," Julian said finally. "But the dog stays outside." Nathaniel's face lit up when Elias entered the room. "You came!" "Said I would." Elias approached the bed carefully, taking in the medical equipment with wide eyes. "How are you feeling?" "Not great," Nathaniel admitted. "But better now." They fell into easy conversation. Elias told stories about the city's hidden corners, places Nathaniel would never see but could imagine through his words. The dog who'd found 3 more friends in an alley. The sunset last night that had painted the buildings orange and gold. Julian watched from the corner, feeling simultaneously grateful and inadequate. This homeless boy was giving his son something precious: distraction, connection, normalcy. After 20 minutes, Nathaniel started to tire. Elias noticed immediately and stood. "I should let you rest." "Will you come back?" Nathaniel's voice was small, vulnerable. "Every day," Elias promised. "Until." He didn't finish the sentence, but they all knew what he meant. Until the end. Julian walked Elias back to the courtyard. They stood in awkward silence until Elias finally spoke. "I heard some nurses talking," he said quietly, "about bone marrow donors, about how rare matches are." "Yes," Julian said curtly, not wanting to discuss it. "What if?" Elias hesitated. "What if someone wanted to get tested, to see if they were a match?" Julian looked at him sharply. "That's not how it works. The database searches through millions of registered donors with detailed genetic profiles. It's not something you just, 'But I could get tested, right? I could register?'" "You're a child," Julian said, more harshly than he intended. "And even if you wanted to, the odds of a random person being a compatible match are astronomical. It would be a waste of everyone's time." Elias flinched at his tone, but stood his ground. "But it's possible?" "Technically, yes. But then I want to try." Julian stared at him. "Why? You barely know Nathaniel. You don't owe us anything." "I know." Elias looked down at his worn shoes, then back up with sudden fierceness. "But nobody ever gave me a choice about anything. Where I live, when I eat, whether I matter. This is something I can choose. Let me choose it." The words hit Julian like a physical blow. Here was a boy with nothing, offering the one thing he had himself, while Julian, with everything, felt powerless. "The testing clinic is across town," Julian said finally, not quite believing he was agreeing to this. "It's a blood draw and genetic screening. Takes a few days for results. I can find it. I'll drive you." The words came out before Julian could stop them. Elias looked shocked. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Julian pulled out his phone. "But if you're doing this, we're doing it right. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., meet me at the front entrance." That night, Julian told Nathaniel about Elias's offer. His son's face glowed with hope that Julian immediately wanted to crush, to protect him from the inevitable disappointment. "Don't get your hopes up, buddy," Julian said carefully. "The chances of him being a match are incredibly small." "But it's a chance," Nathaniel said. "That's more than we had yesterday." Julian couldn't argue with that logic. In his penthouse later, staring at his screens, full of global registries and experimental treatments, Julian felt something shift. He'd been so focused on finding the solution, on controlling the outcome, that he'd forgotten what Nathaniel actually needed. Not a miracle, just someone willing to try. A homeless boy who shared his food with stray dogs was offering his blood, his bone marrow, his time, not because he expected anything in return, but because another child had asked him to visit. Julian thought about the empire he'd built, the ruthless efficiency with which he'd climbed from poverty to power. He'd told himself he was escaping the helplessness he'd known as a child, that wealth meant control. But here was Elias, with no control over anything, choosing to step forward anyway. Who was really powerless? Julian closed his laptop and went to the window. Somewhere out there, Elias was probably cold, hungry, scared. Tomorrow, Julian would take him to get tested. The odds were impossible, millions to one against a match. But impossible odds had never stopped Julian before. Maybe they didn't have to start now. The clinic opened at 9, but Julian arrived at 8:45, his sleek black car idling at the hospital's front entrance. He told himself he was early out of efficiency, not anxiety. But his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, and he'd already checked his watch 4 times. 8:52. No sign of Elias. Julian's phone buzzed Thompson with updates on the overnight search. Still no matches in the registry. The algorithm had expanded to international databases, casting a wider net, but the genetic markers needed were incredibly specific. 4 days left. 8:56. Still no Elias. Julian felt irritation rise. Of course, the boy wouldn't show. It had been a nice gesture, born from momentary emotion. But reality had probably set in overnight. Why would a street kid voluntarily go to a medical facility for testing, especially when the odds were so? A figure appeared at the corner, walking quickly. Elias, wearing the same worn clothes as yesterday, but his face was scrubbed clean and his hair was damp. He'd found somewhere to wash. The small dog trotted beside him. Julian lowered the passenger window. "You came. Said I would." Elias bent down to the dog. "Stay here, buddy. Guard the entrance." He looked at Julian through the window. "He'll be okay out here, right? Nobody will hurt him?" The concern in his voice, worry for a stray dog, while volunteering to have needles stuck in his arm, made something in Julian's chest tighten. "I'll have security. Keep an eye on him," Julian said. "Get in." The drive across town was silent at first. Elias sat rigid in the leather seat, clearly uncomfortable in the expensive car. He kept his hands folded in his lap, careful not to touch anything. "You can relax," Julian said finally. "It's just a car." "It's not just anything," Elias replied quietly. "This car probably costs more than everything I've ever owned put together." Julian didn't know how to respond to that. It was true, but acknowledging it felt cruel somehow. "Why did you really agree to get tested?" Julian asked, keeping his eyes on the road. "And don't tell me it's because Nathaniel asked. There's got to be more to it." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "When I was 10, he finally said, my mom got sick, really sick, like Nathaniel. She needed medicine we couldn't afford. I tried everything, asked people for help, tried to earn money, even," he paused, "even stole once, got caught. The medicine still cost too much." Julian glanced over, saw Elias staring out the window. "She died on a Tuesday," Elias continued, his voice flat with old grief. "And the whole time, I kept thinking, if someone had just helped, if someone with money had just chosen to care. But nobody did. We didn't matter enough." "I'm sorry," Julian said, and meant it. "I'm not telling you for sympathy," Elias looked at him directly. "I'm telling you because I know what it's like to watch someone die when you're powerless to stop it. And I know what it's like to be invisible, to have people look right through you like you're not there. His voice strengthened. Nathaniel saw me. He didn't look through me. He saw me. So yeah, maybe I won't be a match. Probably won't. But at least I tried. At least someone can say I mattered enough to try. The words settled between them, heavy with truth. Julian had spent years looking through people like Elias, not out of cruelty, but out of self-protection. Acknowledging poverty meant acknowledging his own past, the helpless child he'd been before he'd clawed his way up. You matter, Julian said quietly. For what it's worth. Elias smiled sadly. To you? Or just because I might save your son? The question was fair, and Julian didn't have a good answer. The genetic testing clinic was sterile and efficient. A nurse named Maria greeted them with professional warmth, her eyebrows rising slightly at the contrast between Julian's designer suit and Elias's threadbare clothes. We need a donor compatibility screening, Julian said. Full genetic panel. Priority processing. Of course, Mr. Cross. She'd clearly recognized him. And this is the potential donor? Yes, Elias. Julian realized he didn't know the boy's last name. Rivera, Elias supplied quietly. Elias Rivera. Maria led them to a testing room and began the intake paperwork. Standard questions, medical history, previous illnesses, current medications. Any chronic health conditions? Maria asked. No, Elias said. When was your last physical exam? Elias hesitated. I don't. I've never had one. Maria's pen paused. Never? I've been on the streets since I was 10, Elias said with forced calm. Doctors cost money. Maria's expression softened. Okay, we'll do a basic health screening as part of this process. Have you eaten today? Elias shook his head. When was your last meal? Yesterday. The food Mr. Cross gave me. Maria glanced at Julian, her eyes carrying judgment she was too professional to voice. Here was a man who could buy hospitals, sitting next to a boy who hadn't eaten in 24 hours. I'll have someone bring food, Maria said. You'll need proper nutrition in your system, for accurate blood work anyway. She left, and Elias and Julian sat in uncomfortable silence. I should have asked if you'd eaten, Julian said finally. Why would you? Elias shrugged. You don't know me. Nathaniel would have asked. Yeah, Elias agreed, a small smile crossing his face. He would have. Maria returned with another nurse carrying sandwiches, fruit, and juice. Eat slowly, she instructed Elias. Your stomach needs to adjust. While Elias ate, trying to maintain dignity despite obvious hunger, Maria ran through more questions. Family history, known allergies, previous blood donations. I need to be honest with you, Elias, Maria said gently. Bone marrow donation is a serious procedure. It requires surgery, anesthesia, and several days of recovery. There are risks, especially for someone who's, she chose her words carefully, someone who might be malnourished. Are you sure you want to proceed? Yes, Elias said without hesitation. Even knowing you might not be a match? The odds are, I know the odds. Elias set down his sandwich. I've lived on odds my whole life. Odds I'd find food, odds I'd survive winter, odds anyone would care. Sometimes you take the chance anyway. Maria looked at Julian. Mr. Cross, as the guardian responsible for the patient. I'm not his guardian, Julian interrupted. He's choosing this himself. He's a minor, Maria pointed out. We need parental consent or legal guardian approval for the screening and any potential donation. The bureaucratic reality crashed down. Of course, they couldn't just test a homeless child without proper authorization. Julian's frustration mounted. Even when someone wanted to help, the system erected barriers. What if I became his temporary guardian? Julian heard himself say. Legally, just for the purposes of this testing and any potential procedure. Both Maria and Elias stared at him. That's possible, Maria said slowly, but it requires paperwork, a court hearing, background checks. How fast can it be done? Emergency guardianship, if you have the right lawyers, maybe 48 hours. Julian pulled out his phone. Consider it done. He looked at Elias. If you agree, Elias's eyes were wide. You'd do that? Just so I could get tested? Just so you could have a choice, Julian corrected. Nobody should be denied a choice because of paperwork. Something passed between them, a fragile understanding, an acknowledgement that maybe they weren't so different after all. Both had known powerlessness. Both had fought against it in their own ways. Okay, Elias said. I agree. Julian made 3 calls from the clinic's parking lot, each one setting wheels in motion. His lawyers would file emergency guardianship papers within the hour. A judge who owed him favors would fast-track the hearing. By tomorrow evening, Elias Rivera would legally be under Julian Cross's protection. It was absurd. 48 hours ago, he hadn't known this boy existed. Now, he was rearranging legal frameworks to give him agency. But when he thought about Nathaniel's smile yesterday, about Elias's fierce determination, about 4 days ticking away like a countdown to oblivion, it didn't feel absurd. It felt like the only sane response to an insane situation. Inside the clinic, Maria was drawing Elias's blood for preliminary screening. The boy watched the vial fill with dark red, his face pale but determined. You're very brave, Maria told him. I've seen adults faint at the sight of needles. I'm not brave, Elias said quietly. I'm just tired of being useless. Julian, watching from the doorway, felt those words land like punches. How many people had made Elias feel useless? How many had looked through him, dismissed him, treated him like debris to be swept aside? How many times had Julian done exactly that to people just like him? All done, Maria said, labeling the vials. We'll have preliminary results in 24 hours. Full genetic panel takes 48 to 72 hours. Too long, Julian said. I'll pay for expedited processing. I want results in 24 hours. Maria hesitated, then nodded. I'll make it happen. On the drive back to the hospital, Elias was quiet, his arm bandaged at the elbow from the blood draw. The dog was still waiting at the entrance, exactly where he'd been left, and bounded over joyfully when Elias emerged from the car. Good boy, Elias murmured, kneeling to embrace the animal. Good, loyal boy. Elias, Julian said, before he could second-guess himself. Until the results come back, until the guardianship is processed, you can't stay on the streets. If you're going to be a potential donor, you need proper food, rest, medical monitoring. Elias stood slowly. What are you saying? I'm saying you should stay at my place. The penthouse has guest rooms. You'd have your own space, your own bathroom, food whenever you want it. Julian paused. The dog, too. Elias stared at him like he'd suggested flying to the moon. Your penthouse. It's practical, Julian said, keeping his voice businesslike to cover the strange emotion in his chest. Maria said, proper nutrition is essential. And legally, if I'm going to be your guardian, even temporarily, I'm responsible for your welfare. I don't need charity, Elias said, pride flashing in his eyes. It's not charity. It's necessity. Julian met his gaze. And maybe it's a little bit of gratitude. For trying. For seeing my son when you had every reason to look away. Elias's defenses wavered. What about Nathaniel? Can I still visit him? Every day, Julian promised. We live 10 minutes from the hospital. The boy looked down at his dog, then at the hospital where a sick child waited, then at Julian's car representing a world he'd never imagined entering. Okay, he said finally. But just until the results come back. Just until then, Julian agreed, though something told him the universe had different plans. They drove to the penthouse as afternoon faded to evening. Elias pressed his face to the window as the elevator climbed 40 stories, watching the city shrink below them. When the doors opened directly into Julian's apartment, the boy froze. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, modern art on walls. The kitchen alone was larger than some apartments. This is where you live? Elias whispered. This is where I exist, Julian corrected, surprising himself with the honesty. Living is different. Nathaniel's been trying to teach me that. He showed Elias to a guest room, complete with its own bathroom, a bed that could sleep 3, and a closet full of clothes that wouldn't fit but could be altered. There's food in the kitchen, Julian said. Help yourself to anything. The shower's through that door. Towels in the cabinet. If you need anything. Mr. Cross, Elias interrupted. Why are you doing this? Julian thought about giving the practical answer, the legal necessity, the medical requirements. But Nathaniel's voice echoed in his head. Real. No pretending. Because you reminded me of who I used to be, Julian said quietly. Before I convinced myself that power and money could protect me from everything. You reminded me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just show up for someone else, even when you have nothing to gain. Elias nodded slowly, accepting this truth. Get some rest, Julian said. Tomorrow we visit Nathaniel together, and hopefully, he couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the impossible hope. Hopefully I'm a match, Elias completed. Even though the odds are, forget the odds, Julian interrupted. I built my entire career on beating impossible odds. Maybe it's time they worked in our favor. That night, Julian lay awake in his own room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else in his space. The shower running, footsteps on marble, the soft whine of a dog. His phone showed the countdown he'd been tracking. 3 days, 14 hours until Dr. Patel's deadline. In the guest room, down the hall, a homeless boy slept in a bed for the first time in years, his dog curled beside him, his blood being analyzed in a lab across town. And in a hospital room 10 minutes away, an 8-year-old boy dreamed of dogs and friends and the impossible hope that tomorrow might bring a miracle. Julian closed his eyes and did something he hadn't done since childhood. He prayed. Sometimes, the people who have the least give the most. Have you ever been surprised by someone's generosity? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through the penthouse windows. Julian woke to the smell of coffee, but he hadn't made any. He found Elias in the kitchen, standing uncertainly by the expensive espresso machine, the dog sitting alertly at his feet. I'm sorry, Elias said quickly. I heard it running last night. Thought I figured out how it worked, but now it's making weird noises and it's fine. Julian moved to the machine, showed him the proper settings. You just have to there, see? They stood in awkward silence as the coffee brewed, two people from different worlds, sharing a kitchen neither quite knew how to navigate together. Did you sleep okay? Julian asked. Elias nodded. Best sleep I've had in. I can't remember. He paused. I kept waking up thinking it was a dream. The bed, the shower, He gestured vaguely at the luxury surrounding them. All of this. It's real, Julian assured him, and you're welcome to it as long as you need. The guardianship hearing is today, right? This afternoon. My lawyers say it's a formality at this point. Judge already reviewed the emergency petition. Julian poured 2 coffees. You'll need to answer some questions. Confirm you consent to the arrangement. And then they can test me properly? Run all the genetic panels? Then they can test you properly, Julian confirmed. Elias wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, staring into the dark liquid. What if I'm not a match? It was the first time he'd voiced the possibility, the first crack in his determined optimism. Then we keep looking, Julian said firmly. But at least we'll know we tried. Will Nathaniel be disappointed? The question, so focused on the other boy's feelings rather than his own, reminded Julian why he'd agreed to this insanity in the first place. Nathaniel will be grateful you tried, Julian said. That's more than most people have offered. The guardianship hearing took place in a small courtroom downtown. Judge Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the paperwork with thorough efficiency. Mr. Cross, she said, you're requesting emergency temporary guardianship of a minor you met 3 days ago. That's highly irregular. I understand, Your Honor, but the circumstances are extraordinary. Elias needs medical authorization for potential donor testing, and time is critical. Judge Morrison turned to Elias. Young man, do you understand what guardianship means? Mr. Cross would have legal authority over your medical decisions, your living arrangements, your education. I understand, Elias said clearly, and I agree to it. Why? You barely know this man. Elias met her gaze steadily. Because he's giving me a choice. Nobody's ever done that before. His son is dying. and I might be able to help. But the system says I can't because I don't have parents or a guardian. So Mr. Cross is fixing that. He's making it so I matter enough to choose. Something shifted in Judge Morrison's expression. Where are your parents, Elias? My mother died 4 years ago. I never knew my father. And you've been living on the streets since then? Yes, ma'am. She looked at Julian. Mr. Cross, if I grant this guardianship even temporarily, you understand you're accepting responsibility for this child's welfare? Food, shelter, medical care, education? I do, Julian said. And what happens after? If the medical situation resolves one way or another, do you intend to maintain guardianship or release him back to, what, the streets? Julian hadn't thought that far ahead. He looked at Elias, this boy who'd appeared in his life like a comet, burning bright and unexpected, and realized he didn't know the answer. He began. He doesn't have to decide that now, Elias interrupted quietly. Just let him help his son. Everything else can wait. Judge Morrison studied them both for a long moment. Then she signed the papers. Emergency temporary guardianship granted for 60 days. Renewable pending circumstances. Mr. Cross, I expect regular updates on this child's welfare. Elias, if you need anything, if you feel unsafe or coerced in any way, my office is available to you. Understood? Yes, Your Honor, they said in unison. They drove directly to the hospital, the signed guardianship papers in Julian's briefcase. Maria was waiting with updated consent forms and a more comprehensive testing protocol. Now that we have proper authorization, she said, we can run the full panel. But I need to be honest. Elias's preliminary blood work shows some concerns. Julian's stomach dropped. What kind of concerns? Anemia, vitamin deficiencies, signs of chronic malnutrition. Nothing immediately dangerous, but it would complicate a bone marrow donation if he is a match. She looked at Elias kindly. We'll start you on supplements and a structured meal plan. But if you are compatible, we'd need at least 2 weeks to get your body in optimal condition for the procedure. 2 weeks, Julian repeated. Nathaniel might not have 2 weeks. I understand, but asking a malnourished teenager to undergo major surgery would be dangerous for both of them. Maria squeezed Julian's shoulder. One step at a time. Let's see if he's even a match first. Nathaniel was sitting up in bed when they arrived, his face pale but alert. He brightened immediately when he saw Elias. You came back, and you brought... He noticed the dog. You brought him. His name's Lucky, Elias announced. Named him this morning. Seemed right. Lucky, Nathaniel repeated, grinning. Can he come closer? The three of them, Julian, Elias, and Lucky, crowded around Nathaniel's bed. The dog, sensing the boy's fragility, was gentle as Nathaniel petted him. Elias got tested, Julian told his son. We'll know in a few days if he's a match. Nathaniel looked at Elias with such pure hope that Julian had to look away. Thank you, he whispered. Haven't done anything yet, Elias said. Might not be able to. You tried. That's something. They spent the afternoon together, an unlikely family unit gathered around a hospital bed. Elias told stories about Lucky's adventures. Nathaniel shared his drawings. Julian, for the first time in memory, let himself simply be present rather than planning, controlling, fixing. Around 3 p.m., Nathaniel started to fade, exhaustion claiming him. As he drifted toward sleep, he murmured, Elias, will you tell me about your mom? The request caught them all off guard. Elias glanced at Julian, who nodded slightly. What do you want to know? Elias asked gently. What was she like? Elias settled into the chair beside the bed, his voice soft. She was kind, really kind, the way most people aren't. We didn't have much, lived in a tiny apartment, worked 3 jobs to keep it, but she always made it feel safe. He paused, remembering. She used to say that being poor didn't mean we had to be small, that we could still take up space in the world, still matter. She sounds amazing, Nathaniel whispered. She was. When she got sick, I thought if I just tried hard enough, found the right help, earned enough money somehow. Elias's voice cracked. But nothing I did mattered. I was too small, too young, too poor. Nobody listened. Julian watched his son reach out and take Elias's hand. I listened, Nathaniel said simply. I see you. You matter. Elias's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. Yeah, you do. That evening, after Nathaniel had fallen asleep and they'd returned to the penthouse, Julian found Elias standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city lights. My mother died in a place like this, Julian said, joining him. Not a penthouse, a rich person's house where she worked as a maid. Brain aneurysm. They called an ambulance. But by the time I got there from school, he trailed off. I was 12. Elias turned, surprised. You were poor? Desperately. My mother cleaned houses to keep us fed. My father left before I was born. After she died, I went into foster care. 5 different homes in 6 years. I promised myself that when I got out, I'd never be powerless again. Never be at someone else's mercy. So you built all this? Elias said, gesturing at the luxury surrounding them. So I built all this, Julian confirmed. Walls made of money. But they didn't protect me from the one thing that actually mattered, couldn't keep my son healthy. All this power, and I'm just as helpless as I was at 12. They stood in silence. 2 people who'd started from similar places, but traveled vastly different paths. Why didn't you tell me before? Elias asked. Because I spent 20 years trying to forget that scared, powerless kid. Looking at you was like looking in a mirror, seeing who I used to be, who I never wanted to be again. Julian's voice roughened. But Nathaniel sees you differently. He sees strength where I saw weakness, courage where I saw vulnerability. Maybe he's right. Maybe I forgot what actually matters. Your mom would be proud of you, Elias said quietly. You built something amazing. You gave your son everything. Except time. Except enough of myself. Julian turned from the window. But you give yourself freely. To Nathaniel. To that dog. To anyone who needs it. That's a kind of wealth I never learned. Elias smiled sadly. Doesn't buy much food, though. No, Julian agreed. But it buys something more valuable. Connection. Purpose. Meaning. He paused. When this is over, whatever happens, you don't have to go back to the streets. The guardianship doesn't have to be temporary if you don't want it to be. Elias stared at him. You mean, stay? Here? With you? I mean, I have a son who needs a brother. And maybe I need to remember who I was before I became this. Julian gestured at his expensive suit. The penthouse. The empire. Before I traded humanity for success. That's a big decision, Elias said carefully. You barely know me. I know you share your food with stray dogs. I know you show up for people even when you have nothing to gain. I know my dying son smiles when you're around. Julian's voice cracked slightly. That's enough to know you're worth knowing. Julian's phone buzzed. A text from Maria. Preliminary results ready. Call me. His heart stopped. Too soon, it was supposed to take longer. Preliminary results usually meant bad news, meant they could rule out compatibility without waiting for the full panel. What is it? Elias asked. Seeing his expression, the clinic. They have preliminary results. They both knew what that likely meant. If Elias had been obviously incompatible, they'd flag it early to manage expectations. Compatible results would need full confirmation. More time. Julian dialed Maria's number, putting it on speaker. Mr. Cross, Maria answered immediately. I wanted to call as soon as I saw the results. And? Julian's voice was steady despite the fear churning in his gut. The preliminary screening shows Elias is a potential match. Not definitive. We need the full genetic panel to confirm, but the major markers align. Honestly, it's extraordinary. The odds of this were, how extraordinary? Julian interrupted. 1 in a million? 1 in 5 million? This kind of compatibility between unrelated individuals is almost unheard of, especially this quickly. Maria's voice carried wonder. The full panel will take another 24 hours, but Mr. Cross, I think we might have a miracle here. Julian looked at Elias, whose face had gone white. What does that mean? Elias whispered. If I'm a match. It means we proceed with preparation, Maria said. Get your nutrition up. Run more health screenings. Prepare for the donation procedure. If the full panel confirms compatibility, we could potentially schedule the transplant within 2 weeks. Nathaniel might not have 2 weeks, Julian said. Then we work faster. But Mr. Cross, this has to be done right. We can't risk both of them. After they hung up, Julian and Elias stood in the penthouse living room, the weight of possibility crushing and exhilarating at once. I might actually be able to save him, Elias said, his voice shaking. I might actually matter enough to. You already matter, Julian interrupted fiercely. Match or not, you matter. To Nathaniel, to me. Don't confuse your value with what you can give us. But Elias was smiling through tears, the smile of someone who'd spent their whole life invisible, finally being seen. 1 in a million, he whispered. My whole life has been bad odds. Maybe it's time for good ones. Julian pulled the boy into an embrace, awkward at first, then genuine. 2 people who'd survived impossible circumstances, now bound together by an even more impossible hope. Outside the windows, the city glittered with indifferent beauty, and somewhere in its heart, a sick child slept, dreaming of dogs and brothers, and tomorrows that might actually come. The next 24 hours moved with excruciating slowness and impossible speed simultaneously. Julian converted his home office into a makeshift medical station. Maria visited twice daily to monitor Elias's nutrition, administer vitamin infusions, and run additional health screenings. The boy who'd been living on scraps now had a carefully calibrated meal plan, supplements color-coded by the hour, and a medical team tracking his every vital sign. This is weird, Elias said on the second morning. Staring at the breakfast spread, Julian had ordered eggs, whole grain toast, fresh fruit, protein shakes. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up back in that alley. You're not, Julian said, sitting across from him with his own coffee. And even after, whatever happens next, you're not going back there. Elias looked up. You can't promise that. I can. I am. Julian met his gaze steadily. The guardianship doesn't expire, not unless you want it to. Why? Elias asked. The question he'd asked before but needed to hear again. Why do you care? Julian thought about giving an easy answer. Gratitude, obligation, convenience. But Nathaniel's voice echoed, real. No pretending. Because watching you give everything when you have nothing reminds me what I forgot along the way, Julian said quietly. I spent 20 years building walls to protect myself from feeling powerless again. But you're surrounded by powerlessness every day. And you haven't let it make you cruel. You haven't let it make you small. He paused. You make me want to be better than I've been. Elias swallowed hard. I'm not special. I'm just a kid who got lucky. Lucky how? Lucky to be homeless? Lucky to lose your mother? Lucky to be invisible to everyone who could have helped? Julian shook his head. No. You survived because you're strong. And now you're choosing to use that strength for someone else. That's not luck. That's character. They visited Nathaniel 3 times a day now, morning, afternoon, evening. The medical team had forbidden more frequent visits to prevent infection risk, but Nathaniel counted the minutes between them. The full genetic panel results were due by afternoon. Tell me more about Lucky, Nathaniel said during the morning visit. The dog curled at the foot of his bed. Hospital policy technically forbade animals, but Julian had made a substantial donation that suddenly made policies flexible. Well, Elias said, settling into the chair that had become his usual spot. Yesterday, I took him to the park near your dad's building. First time he'd ever seen that much grass. You should have seen him ran in circles for 10 minutes straight, like he couldn't believe it was real. Nathaniel laughed, the sound thin but genuine. I want to see that. When I'm better, can we take him to the park together? Absolutely, Elias promised. We'll take him every day if you want. And maybe we could get him a brother? Another dog? So he's not lonely? Julian watched them plan a future that might never come, watched his son's eyes light up with hope, and felt his heart crack open wider with each passing moment. 2 dogs, Elias agreed. We'll get a huge one, like a Great Dane, and Lucky can boss him around even though he's tiny. Lucky, and Goliath, Nathaniel announced. Because of David and Goliath, but backwards. Perfect, Elias said, grinning. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Cross? Dr. Patel would like to see you in his office. Julian's stomach dropped. Now? Now. He looked at Elias, who'd gone pale. They both knew what this meant the results were in. I'll be right back, Julian told Nathaniel, keeping his voice steady. Dad? His son's voice was small. Is it bad news? I don't know yet, buddy. But whatever it is, we'll face it together. Dr. Patel's office felt different this time, less like a funeral home, more like a space where impossible things might actually happen. Sit down, Julian, Dr. Patel said, and his tone carried something that hadn't been there before. Hope. The results? Julian asked, unable to wait. Elias is a match. Dr. Patel slid papers across his desk. Not just a potential match, a nearly perfect match. 10 out of 10 HLA markers aligned. In 30 years of practice, I've never seen compatibility this strong between unrelated individuals. Julian stared at the papers, the genetic codes and medical terminology blurring together. So, he can donate? If he's healthy enough, yes. Maria's been monitoring his nutrition levels, and he's responding well to the supplements. We'd still need at least 10 days to get him in optimal condition. Nathaniel doesn't have 10 days. According to my initial prognosis, no. But he's been more stable than expected over the past few days. Dr. Patel leaned forward. I think we can do this in 7 days. It's faster than I'd like. Riskier for both of them, but possible. 7 days. The same deadline that had felt like a countdown to death now felt like a race toward life. What are the risks? Julian asked. For Nathaniel, the standard transplant risks rejection, infection, complications from the chemotherapy needed to prepare his body. For Elias, Dr. Patel hesitated. He's young, malnourished, and has never had surgery before. The bone marrow extraction is invasive. There are risks of infection, bleeding, adverse reactions to anesthesia. Given his condition, those risks are elevated. How elevated? Elevated enough that I need informed consent from both him and you as his guardian. Elevated enough that any other doctor might refuse to proceed. Dr. Patel met Julian's eyes. But I've watched that boy sit with your son every day. I've seen what their friendship means to both of them. If Elias understands the risks and still wants to proceed, and if you approve, then I'll do everything in my power to keep them both safe. Julian thought about Elias's words. Nobody ever gave me a choice. I'll talk to him, Julian said, but the choice is his. He found Elias in the hallway outside Nathaniel's room, pacing nervously. Lucky sat nearby, watching with alert eyes. Well? Elias asked before Julian could speak. You're a match. Nearly perfect compatibility. Elias's knees seemed to give out. He sat down hard on a waiting room chair, his face cycling through shock, joy, terror, determination. I can save him, he whispered. I can actually save him. Julian sat beside him. Elias, listen to me. There are risks. Dr. Patel says your body isn't in optimal condition. The surgery could have complications. I don't care. I care. And I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. Julian took his hand. This isn't just a blood draw. They'll put you under anesthesia, extract bone marrow from your hip. You'll be in pain for weeks. There could be infections, complications we can't predict. And given your nutritional state, I said I don't care. Elias looked at him with fierce certainty. My whole life, nobody needed me for anything. I was just extra. Someone to look through, to step over, to forget. But Nathaniel needs me. I'm the one person in the entire world who can save him. His voice broke. How could I not do this? Because you matter too, Julian said urgently. Your life matters. Your safety matters. I won't let you throw yourself away just to... I'm not throwing myself away. I'm choosing something that actually means something. Elias squeezed Julian's hand. You asked me why I agreed to get tested. I told you about my mom. about being powerless. But there's more. He took a shaky breath. When my mom died, I wanted to die too. For months, I didn't care if I made it through winter. I didn't care about anything. And then I saw Nathaniel, this kid who has everything, whose dad has all the money in the world, and none of it mattered. He was just as scared as I was when my mom was dying, just as helpless. Tears tracked down Elias's cheeks now, unstoppable. I saw him, and I thought, maybe this is why I'm still here. Maybe I survived so I could save someone else, so my life could mean something after all. He wiped roughly at his face. So yeah, there are risks. But living on the streets was risky. Starving was risky. Being invisible was risky. At least this risk means something. Julian pulled him close. This brave, broken, beautiful boy who'd stumbled into their lives and changed everything. Okay, he whispered. Okay, but you're not invisible anymore. And whatever happens, you're not alone. They told Nathaniel together. His face transformed, fear giving way to hope, despair to possibility. He cried, and Elias cried, and Julian found himself crying too, something he hadn't done since his mother's funeral. You're really going to save me? Nathaniel whispered. I'm really going to try, Elias promised. What if it doesn't work? Then at least we tried together. Nathaniel reached out, and Elias took his hand. They stayed like that, two boys born into different worlds, now bound by blood and choice and love. That evening, back at the penthouse, Julian ordered pizza at Elias's request, something he said he hadn't had in years. They ate on the living room floor because Nathaniel had once mentioned wanting to have a picnic, and this was as close as they could get. Tell me about when you were my age, Elias said. When you were poor, before all this. Julian hesitated, then began talking about his mother's work-worn hands, about foster homes where he'd learned to make himself small, about the scholarship that had saved him, the mentor who'd believed in him, the first business deal that had changed everything. Did you ever think about the people you left behind? Elias asked quietly. The other kids in foster care? The people still struggling? No, Julian admitted. I told myself I couldn't look back. That survival meant moving forward and never stopping. But you stopped for Nathaniel. I stopped because I had to. Because he's my son, and I love him more than I thought I could love anything. Julian paused. But you made me stop for you too. Made me see what I'd been ignoring. What's that? That we're all connected. That my success doesn't mean anything if I use it to build walls instead of bridges. That the scared kid I used to be is still out there in 1,000 different faces, waiting for someone to see him. Julian looked at Elias directly, waiting for someone to choose him. Elias smiled, fragile and real. So choose him. After this is over, however it ends, use what you have to help kids like me, like you used to be. I will, Julian promised. We will. Together, they sat in comfortable silence, eating pizza, while Lucky dozed between them and the city lights glittered outside. Tomorrow would bring more medical preparations, more tests, more fear. But tonight, they were just two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate tragedies, building something that looked surprisingly like family. Before bed, Julian found himself in Nathaniel's room at the hospital one last time, unable to stay away. His son was sleeping, his breathing steady but shallow. Julian sat in the chair where Elias usually sat and took his son's hand. I'm sorry, he whispered, for all the times I chose work over you, for building an empire when all you wanted was a father, for thinking money could protect us from everything. His voice broke. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving. Whatever happens next, I'm right here. Nathaniel's eyes fluttered open. Dad? Hey, buddy. Didn't mean to wake you. I'm glad you did. Nathaniel squeezed his hand weakly. Dad, even if this doesn't work, even if I don't make it, I want you to keep Elias. Promise me. Nate. Promise me. He needs someone. And you need him too, even if you don't realize it yet. Julian felt tears burn his eyes. I promise. But you're going to make it. We're going to make it through this, together. Okay. Nathaniel whispered, already drifting back to sleep. All of us, together. Julian sat there long after his son slept, holding his hand, keeping vigil against the darkness, and believing for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, love might actually be enough. The next 5 days passed in a blur of medical preparation. Elias submitted to endless tests, blood draws, nutritional assessments. His body was responding to treatment weight slowly increasing, color returning to his cheeks, energy levels rising. Maria was cautiously optimistic. Another 2 days, she told Julian on day 5. 2 more days and we can proceed. 2 days to give a 14-year-old boy the strength to undergo major surgery. 2 days to prepare Nathaniel's body to receive the transplant that might save his life. 2 days that felt both infinite and impossibly short. On the morning of day 6, the day before the scheduled procedure, Julian woke to find Elias's bedroom door open, the room empty. Panic seized him until he found the boy on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the sunrise. Couldn't sleep, Elias said without turning. Julian joined him, 2 silhouettes against the dawn. Second thoughts? No, just thinking about my mom, wishing she could see this, see that I mattered enough to save someone. Elias's voice was steady, but Julian heard the tremor underneath. She always said I was meant for something important. I just never believed her. She was right. Maybe. Elias finally looked at him. Are you scared? Terrified, Julian admitted. I'm about to let them cut into you and my son on the same day. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose you both? You won't lose me. I'm tougher than I look. I know you are. But Elias, Julian struggled for words, you've become important to me, not because of what you can do for Nathaniel, but because of who you are. If something happened to you, if this surgery went wrong, it won't. You can't promise that. No, Elias agreed. But I can promise I'll fight. For Nathaniel, for you, for Lucky. He smiled slightly. For myself. The final pre-surgery meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in Dr. Patel's office. Julian, Elias, and Dr. Patel, along with Dr. Sarah Chen, the surgeon who would perform Elias's extraction. Dr. Chen was a small woman with kind eyes and steady hands. She laid out the procedure in clinical detail: the anesthesia, the needle insertion into Elias's hip, the extraction process, the recovery expectations. You'll be under general anesthesia for approximately 90 minutes, she explained to Elias. When you wake up, you'll have significant pain in your lower back and hips. We'll manage it with medication, but you need to understand this will hurt for several weeks. I understand, Elias said. And there are risks we need to discuss. Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. Your recent blood work shows improvement, but you're still technically malnourished. Your body is under stress from rapid nutritional changes. The anesthesia carries elevated risks for someone in your condition. Respiratory complications, cardiac issues, adverse reactions. What are the odds? Julian asked, his voice tight. Of major complications? 5 to 8% normally. For Elias, given his medical history and current state, I'd estimate closer to 12 to 15%. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 15% chance that something could go catastrophically wrong. And if we wait longer, Julian pressed. Another week? Another month? Nathaniel doesn't have another month, Doctor, Patel said quietly. He's been stable, but his numbers are declining. We have a small window tomorrow, maybe the day after at the latest. Dr. Chen turned to Elias. I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. There's a real chance you could die on that table. Small, but real. Are you prepared for that possibility? Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, if I die trying to save someone else, that's a better death than starving alone in an alley. At least I'd matter. At least my life would count for something. Your life already counts, Julian said fiercely. With or without this surgery, you matter. To you, maybe, because of Nathaniel. But to the world? Elias shook his head. The world won't even notice if I'm gone. But Nathaniel, he has a future. He has people who love him, a father who'd do anything for him. If I can give him more time, more years, his voice cracked. How could I not take that risk? Dr. Chen looked at Julian. As his guardian, you have the right to refuse consent. You can stop this. Julian felt the weight of the decision crushing him. He could protect Elias, keep him safe, refuse to let him undergo this dangerous procedure. And in doing so, he'd watch his son die. Or he could sign the papers, give Elias the choice he'd fought for, and risk losing them both. "What do you want me to do?" he asked Elias, his voice breaking. "Let me choose," Elias said simply. "You promised me a choice. Let me have it." Julian signed the consent forms with shaking hands. The surgery was scheduled for 6 a.m. the following morning. Elias's extraction first, then immediately into Nathaniel's transplant procedure. They went to see Nathaniel together to tell him everything was set. But when they arrived at his room, Dr. Patel was already there, along with 2 other doctors Julian didn't recognize. His heart stopped. "What's wrong?" Dr. Patel turned his face grave. "Nathaniel had an episode about an hour ago. Severe pain, elevated heart rate, concerning blood work." "What kind of episode?" Julian pushed past them to his son's bedside. Nathaniel looked smaller than ever, his skin translucent, his breathing labored. "His body is starting to fail faster than we anticipated," Dr. Patel said carefully. "The disease is accelerating." "What does that mean for tomorrow?" "It means we need to move faster. And it means..." "Doctor," Patel hesitated. "It means Elias's condition is even more critical to success. If there are any complications during his extraction, any delays, Nathaniel might not survive the wait," Julian finished, his voice hollow. He looked at Elias, who'd gone white, and saw the terrible weight settling on the boy's shoulders. Not just the risk to himself, but the crushing responsibility of knowing that any complication, any problem with his body, could cost Nathaniel his life. "I'll be fine," Elias said, but his voice shook. "I'll be fine. I have to be fine." That evening, back at the penthouse, Julian found Elias in the bathroom, vomiting. Stress, fear, the rapid nutritional changes, it all caught up at once. "I'm sorry," Elias gasped between heaves. "I'm sorry. I can't." "It's okay," Julian soothed, rubbing his back. "It's a normal stress response. What if I'm not strong enough? What if my body can't handle the surgery? What if I fail him?" Elias was crying now, all the brave facade stripped away. "What if I'm the reason Nathaniel dies?" "Stop!" Julian pulled him up, made him look at him. "This is not on you. None of this is your fault or your responsibility. You're a child who's already given more than anyone should ever have to give. But if I can't, then we deal with it. Together." "But Elias, listen to me." Julian cupped his face, made sure he heard every word. "If you want to back out, if you're too scared, if you've changed your mind, that's okay. I won't be angry. Nathaniel won't be angry. You don't owe us your life. But he'll die. Maybe. Or maybe we find another option. But I won't sacrifice you to save him. I won't." Julian's voice broke. "I can't lose you both." Elias stared at him, tears streaming down his face. "When did you start caring about me? Really caring? Not just because of what I could do?" "The moment you shared your food with a stray dog," Julian said. "The moment you admitted you were scared. The moment you saw my son and didn't look away." He pulled Elias close. "You became mine the second you walked into our lives, and I protect what's mine." They stayed like that guardian and ward, father and almost son holding each other, while the weight of tomorrow pressed down on them both. Julian couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., he went to the guest room and found Elias awake too, staring at the ceiling. "Can't stop thinking," Elias admitted. "About tomorrow?" "About everything. My mom, the streets, finding Lucky, meeting Nathaniel." He turned his head to look at Julian. "Finding you." Julian sat on the edge of the bed. "I wish I'd found you sooner. Wish I'd been looking for kids like you instead of building walls to forget I'd ever been one. You're looking now. That counts. Does it? Or is it too late?" Julian's voice was raw with exhaustion and fear. What if I lose you tomorrow? What if 15% becomes 100% and I have to tell Nathaniel that you died trying to save him? What if, Julian? Elias sat up, and it was the first time he'd used Julian's first name instead of Mr. Cross. I need you to promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me tomorrow, if I don't wake up, I need you to tell Nathaniel it wasn't his fault, that I chose this, that I wanted my life to mean something. And it did. Elias's voice was steady now, certain. And I need you to promise you'll keep fighting for kids like me, that you'll use everything you have to make sure no other kid has to live on the streets, has to feel invisible, has to wonder if they matter. Elias, promise me. I promise, Julian whispered. But you're going to be fine. You're going to wake up, and Nathaniel's going to recover. And we're going to have years together. Years to make good on those promises together. I hope so, Elias said. I really hope so. At 4 a.m., Julian's phone rang. The hospital. His heart seized. Mr. Cross, Dr. Patel's voice was urgent. You need to get here. Now. What happened? Is it Nathaniel? Just get here. Both of you. They dressed in seconds, drove through empty streets with Julian's heart hammering. What had happened? Had Nathaniel taken a turn? Was it already too late? They burst into Nathaniel's room to find him awake, sitting up, Dr. Patel beside him. Dad, Nathaniel said, his voice weak but clear. I heard Dr. Patel talking about Elias's risks, about the 15%. Buddy, we can talk about this later. No. Nathaniel's voice was stronger than Julian had heard in days. I can't let him do it. The room went silent. What? Elias whispered. I can't let you risk your life for me, Nathaniel said, tears streaming down his face. You're my friend, my brother. I won't let you die trying to save me. Nathaniel. Elias moved to the bedside. No. Nathaniel was crying harder now. I'm the one who's sick. I'm the one who's supposed to die, not you. You have your whole life ahead of you. You can't throw it away for me. I'm not throwing it away, Elias said desperately. I'm using it for something that matters. I don't want to matter that much. Nathaniel shouted, then dissolved into sobs. I don't want your death on my hands. I don't want to be the reason you're gone. Please, Elias, please don't do this. Julian watched his world fracture, his son begging his friend not to save him. Elias, devastated that his gift was being rejected. And caught between them, Julian realized the terrible truth. There was no right answer, no solution that didn't cost someone everything. Nathaniel, Julian said carefully, kneeling by his son's bed. This is Elias's choice. We can't take it from him. Then I'm making a choice too, Nathaniel said, his small voice carrying steel. I'm saying no. I don't consent. I won't let him do the surgery. You don't get to decide that, Elias said, his voice breaking. I'm the donor. It's my choice. And I'm the patient. Doesn't that make it mine? They stared at each other, two boys who loved each other too much to let the other sacrifice, each trying to save the other by refusing the gift. And Julian, caught in the middle, finally understood what real powerlessness felt like. Not the powerlessness of poverty or circumstance, but the powerlessness of love that couldn't protect everyone, couldn't save everyone, couldn't make everything okay. I need you both to stop, Julian said, his voice thick with unshed tears. Just stop and listen. They turned to him, these two boys who'd become his entire world. Nathaniel, I understand your fear. I understand not wanting Elias to risk himself. But if you refuse this transplant, you're taking away his choice just as much as if we forced him into surgery. You're making him watch you die when he could have prevented it. Is that really what you want? Nathaniel wavered. And Elias, Julian turned to the older boy. I understand your need to matter, to choose something meaningful. But Nathaniel's right too. If something happens to you, he'll carry that guilt forever. He'll blame himself for your death, even though it wasn't his fault. Is that the gift you want to give him? Elias's face crumpled. So here's what I'm asking, Julian continued, his voice breaking. I'm asking you both to be brave in a different way. Nathaniel, be brave enough to accept help. to let someone love you enough to take risks for you. And Elias, be brave enough to trust that you matter, whether this surgery happens or not. That your life has value beyond what you can give us. He pulled them both close, his son on one side, this boy who'd become his son on the other. We go forward together, Julian said. Or we don't go forward at all. But I need you both to choose, really choose, knowing all the risks, all the consequences. Choose because it's what you truly want, not because you think you have to. Silence filled the room, heavy with impossible decisions. Finally, Elias spoke. Nathaniel, look at me. Nathaniel turned to face him. I'm not doing this because I think I'm worthless, Elias said. I'm doing it because you're worth it, because you saw me when no one else did, because you made me feel like I mattered. Let me give that back to you, please. What if you die? Nathaniel whispered. Then I die knowing someone cared enough to try to stop me. That's more than I ever had before. Elias took his hand. But I don't plan on dying. I plan on waking up, recovering, and taking you and Lucky to that park, together, like we promised. Nathaniel looked at his father, then back at Elias. You promise you'll fight? That you'll be careful? I promise. And if something goes wrong, you won't blame yourself? You'll know it wasn't your fault? I'll know, Nathaniel said, though his voice shook. They held each other, these two boys facing impossible odds, choosing love over fear. And Julian, watching them, felt something inside him break and heal simultaneously. At 5:45 a.m., they wheeled Elias toward the operating room. He was dressed in a hospital gown, an IV already in his arm, his face pale but determined. I'll be here, Julian promised. When you wake up, I'll be right here. Take care of Lucky, Elias said, and take care of Nathaniel. I will. But you take care of yourself. That's an order. Elias smiled weakly. Yes, sir. The doors swung closed, and Julian was left in the hallway, utterly powerless, able only to wait and hope and pray that the universe would be kind to a boy who'd already suffered enough. Inside the operating room, Dr. Chen prepared her instruments while Elias stared at the ceiling. Scared? She asked gently. Terrified, Elias admitted. But also, ready. For the first time in my life, I'm ready. The anesthesia began to flow. Count backwards from 10, the anesthesiologist instructed. 10, 9, 8. Elias's voice faded. 7, 6, and the world went dark. The surgical waiting room was a purgatory of fluorescent lights and stale coffee. Julian sat in a plastic chair that cost less than his shoes, and for the first time in years, money meant absolutely nothing. Thompson had arrived within an hour, bringing Julian's laptop, files, urgent matters that supposedly required his attention. Julian had sent him away with a single sentence. Nothing matters except this. Now, it was just him. Lucky curled at his feet. Another violation of hospital policy that Julian's donation had made irrelevant, and the relentless tick of the clock on the wall. 6:47 a.m. Elias had been under for an hour. Dr. Chen had said 90 minutes for the extraction. Then they'd rush the harvested bone marrow to Nathaniel's operating room, where Dr. Patel's team would begin the transplant process. 2 surgeries, 2 lives hanging in balance. Julian's phone buzzed. Messages from business partners, board members, journalists wanting comments on his company's latest developments. He silenced it without reading them. The door opened. A nurse, not Maria. Someone new approached with a clipboard. Mr. Cross, I need to update Elias Rivera's emergency contact information, in case she caught herself. For our records. Put me down, Julian said. For everything. I'm his guardian. Any other family we should notify? No, there's no one else. Just me. The words felt heavy with meaning. This boy, who'd had no one, now had Julian. And if something went wrong, Julian would be the one to receive the news, to make the decisions, to bear the weight. He'd spent 20 years avoiding exactly this kind of responsibility, the emotional liability of caring deeply enough that loss could destroy you. But sitting in this waiting room, he realized he wouldn't trade it. Wouldn't trade knowing Elias. Wouldn't trade the way the boy had cracked open his carefully constructed armor. 7:23 a.m. The door burst open. Dr. Chen, still in her surgical scrubs, her expression unreadable. Julian stood so fast, his chair skidded backward. Is he? The extraction was successful, Dr. Chen said quickly, seeing his panic. Elias is in recovery. He did well. Julian's knees nearly gave out. He's okay? He's stable. There were some tense moments. His blood pressure dropped during the procedure, and we had to adjust the anesthesia dosage, but he pulled through. He's strong, Mr. Cross. Stronger than his medical history would suggest. Can I see him? Not yet. He's still unconscious, and we're monitoring him closely. The next few hours are critical. We need to watch for any delayed reactions, complications from the anesthesia. Doctor, Chen's expression softened. But he's fighting. You should be proud of him. I am, Julian whispered. God, I am. The bone marrow was perfect quality. Dr. Patel's team is beginning Nathaniel's transplant now. If all goes well, the infusion will take 3 to 4 hours. Then we wait to see if his body accepts it. So many ifs, so many variables beyond anyone's control. Thank you, Julian said, for taking care of him. Dr. Chen nodded. He's a remarkable young man. In all my years doing this, I've never seen someone so determined to save someone else. She paused. He kept saying your son's name as he went under. Tell Nathaniel I kept my promise. Julian pressed his palms against his eyes, fighting back tears he'd been holding since 5 a.m. I'll update you on his progress every hour, Dr. Chen promised, then disappeared back through the surgical doors. Julian paced the waiting room, unable to sit, unable to be still. Lucky followed him back and forth, sensing his agitation. 8:15 a.m. Elias had been in recovery for almost an hour, still unconscious. 8:47 a.m. A nurse emerged with an update. Elias's vitals were stable, but he hadn't woken yet. Normal for the amount of anesthesia they'd used, but they were monitoring closely. 9:30 a.m. Dr. Patel appeared, still in surgical gear. Nathaniel received the transplant. His body is responding well so far, no immediate rejection signs. Now we wait and see if the new marrow engrafts. How long until we know? Days, weeks, potentially. But the first 24 hours will tell us a lot. Doctor, Patel squeezed Julian's shoulder. He's got a fighter's chance now, Julian. That's more than we had yesterday. A fighter's chance. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was hope. Can I see him? Briefly. He's heavily sedated, but you can sit with him. Nathaniel looked impossibly small in the surgical recovery room, surrounded by machines and monitors. An IV line delivered the life-saving marrow, Elias's gift, flowing into his veins. Julian took his son's hand, careful not to disturb the tubes and wires. Hey, buddy, he whispered. Elias did it. He kept his promise. Now you need to keep yours. You need to fight. You need to stay with me. His voice broke. I can't lose you. I can't lose either of you. So you fight, okay? You fight with everything you have. Nathaniel didn't respond, lost in medicated sleep. But Julian imagined his fingers squeezed back. 10:45 a.m. Julian was allowed into Elias's recovery room. The boy lay motionless on the hospital bed, his skin even paler than usual against the white sheets. Monitors beeped steadily. An oxygen line ran under his nose. His hip was heavily bandaged where they'd extracted the marrow. Julian pulled a chair close and took Elias's hand, mirroring the gesture he'd made with Nathaniel. You did it, Julian said softly. You saved him. You kept your promise. He swallowed hard. Now you need to keep mine. You need to wake up. You need to come back to us. Minutes passed. 10, 20, 40. At once 27 de la mañana, Elias's eyes fluttered. Julian leaned forward. Elias, can you hear me? A soft groan. Elias's eyes opened halfway, unfocused and confused. Hey, Julian said, relief flooding through him. You're okay. You're in recovery. The surgery's done. Nathaniel? Elias's voice was barely a whisper. Got the transplant. He's doing well so far. Julian squeezed his hand. You saved him. You did it. Elias tried to smile, but pain flickered across his face. Hurts. I know. They'll give you something for it. Just rest. Kept. Promise. You kept your promise, Julian confirmed, his vision blurring with tears. You incredible, brave, selfless boy. You kept your promise. Elias's eyes drifted closed again, but his breathing was steady, his grip on Julian's hand weak but real. The next 12 hours were a vigil. Julian moved between rooms, Elias's recovery space and Nathaniel's transplant unit, refusing to leave the hospital despite the nurse's insistence that he needed rest. Thompson brought fresh clothes, food Julian barely touched, updates on business matters Julian didn't care about. Sir, Thompson said carefully around 8 p.m., the board is asking when you'll be back in the office. There are decisions that need... Tell the board I'm exactly where I need to be, Julian interrupted. If they can't manage without me for a few days, then I've built a weaker company than I thought. Thompson nodded and retreated. Maria appeared around 9 p.m. with updates. Elias's pain is being managed. His vitals are strong. He's young and healing fast. She smiled. He's asking for you and asking about Nathaniel constantly. What are you telling him? The truth that Nathaniel's body is accepting the transplant so far. No rejection signs. It's cautiously optimistic. She paused. Julian, what you did taking that boy in, giving him this chance, it's extraordinary. He gave us the chance, Julian corrected. I just stopped being blind long enough to see it. At 10 p.m., Julian sat between both rooms, Elias recovering on one side, Nathaniel sleeping peacefully on the other, and finally let himself feel the weight of the past week. 7 days ago, he'd been given a death sentence for his son. 7 days ago, he'd been a man who believed control and money could solve everything. Now, he was a man who'd learned that the most valuable things, courage, sacrifice, love, couldn't be bought or controlled. They could only be given freely by people brave enough to choose connection over self-preservation. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Patel. Come to Nathaniel's room. Now. Julian's heart stopped. Was something wrong? Had the transplant failed? He ran. Dr. Patel was standing by Nathaniel's bed, but he was smiling. Actually smiling. What? What is it? Look at his numbers, Dr. Patel said, gesturing to the monitors. His white blood cell count is rising. His body temperature is normalizing. These are early signs that the transplant is taking, that the new marrow is beginning to function. Julian stared at the numbers, afraid to hope. How early? Very early. We need days or weeks to confirm full engraftment. But Julian, Dr. Patel's voice was thick with emotion. I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what successful transplants look like in the first 24 hours. And this looks successful. Julian sat down hard, his legs refusing to support him. Are you telling me he's going to live? I'm telling you, he has a real chance. A good chance. Better than I dared hope. Doctor. Patel put a hand on Julian's shoulder. That boy Elias, his bone marrow is a perfect match. His gift is working. Julian pressed his face into his hands and let himself break. Let the fear and exhaustion and desperate hope pour out in sobs he'd been holding back for 7 impossible days. At midnight, they wheeled Elias's bed next to Nathaniel's so the boys could be together. Hospital policy technically forbade it, but Dr. Patel had quietly arranged it anyway. Elias was awake now, groggy from pain medication but alert. Nathaniel was still sleeping, but his color was better, his breathing easier. He looks better, Elias whispered, staring at his friend. He is better, Julian confirmed. Because of you. Is he going to be okay? The doctors think so. It's too early to know for certain. But the signs are good, really good. Elias smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. I did it. I actually did it. You did it, Julian agreed. You saved his life. No, Elias said softly. We saved his life. All of us together. Julian pulled a chair between the two beds and sat, one hand on Nathaniel's arm, one hand holding Elias's. I need to tell you something, Julian said. The guardianship paperwork, it's temporary right now. 60 days, renewable. After Nathaniel recovers, after you heal, you'll have a choice to make. Elias looked at him carefully. What choice? You can go back to your life whatever you want it to be. I'll make sure you have resources, support, whatever you need. Or, Julian's voice caught, or you can stay. With us. Make it permanent. Become part of this family, such as it is. You mean adoption? If you want it, if you'd want that. Julian couldn't read Elias's expression. I know I'm not perfect. I know I work too much. I'm probably going to make 1,000 mistakes as a father, but I want to try. I want to give you the family you should have had all along, the choice you never got. Elias was quiet for a long moment, staring at Nathaniel's sleeping form. What does Nathaniel want? He finally asked. He wants you to stay. He asked me to promise, made me promise that no matter what happened, I'd keep you, that you'd be his brother. His brother, Elias repeated wonderingly. I always wanted a brother. So is that a yes? Elias looked at Julian, his eyes bright with tears and hope and something that looked like belonging. Yeah, he whispered. Yeah, that's a yes. Julian pulled him into a careful embrace, mindful of his surgical wounds, and felt something fundamental shift in the universe. His family broken, strange, born from tragedy and choice, but his family nonetheless. Thank you, Elias said, for seeing me, for choosing me, for letting me matter. Thank you, Julian replied, for reminding me what actually matters, for teaching me that the wealth that counts can't be deposited in banks. They sat like that as midnight became early morning, two brothers sleeping side by side, one recovering from giving life, one recovering from receiving it, and a father keeping watch over them both. Outside the window, the city continued its indifferent dance, but inside this room, something miraculous had happened. A street boy had given everything to save a dying child. A millionaire had learned that money couldn't buy what mattered most. And three lost souls had found each other in the wreckage of their separate tragedies, building something that looked remarkably like redemption. 3 weeks later, the morning sunlight filtered through the penthouse windows differently now, softer, somehow. Or maybe Julian was just seeing it differently, seeing everything differently. He woke to the sound of laughter from the kitchen. Real laughter. The kind that filled empty spaces and made a house feel like a home. Julian found them there. Nathaniel in his wheelchair. Temporary, the doctors assured, until his strength fully returned. And Elias, leaning against the counter, both of them covered in flour. Lucky sat nearby, tail wagging, clearly hoping for dropped food. What's happening here? Julian asked, unable to hide his smile. Pancakes, Nathaniel announced. Elias is teaching me. Well, trying to teach me. I'm not very good at it. You're doing fine, Elias said, flipping a slightly lopsided pancake. Besides, the burnt ones build character. Julian's chest tightened with an emotion he was still learning to name. Not the desperate love born from fear of loss, but something quieter, steadier. The love of ordinary moments, flour-covered counters and burnt pancakes, and two boys who'd become brothers. How are you feeling? Julian asked, addressing both of them. Good, Nathaniel said. Dr. Patel says my numbers keep improving. He used the word remarkable like 5 times yesterday. And you? Julian turned to Elias, who still moved carefully, his hip healing from the extraction. Better every day, Maria says. I'm healing faster than expected. Elias grinned. Apparently, proper nutrition makes a difference. Who knew? The joke was light, but Julian heard the weight beneath it. The acknowledgement of where Elias had been, how far he'd come, how close they'd all been to losing everything. Pancakes are ready, Elias announced. Everyone to the table. And yes, Lucky, you can have one too. They ate together at the dining table Julian had previously only used for business meetings. Nathaniel chattered about his physical therapy session scheduled for that afternoon. Elias talked about the online classes Julian had enrolled him in proper education, something he'd never had consistent access to before. There's a section on genetics, Elias said. It's actually kind of cool, learning about the science behind what we did. Like, I understand now why the odds of us matching were so impossible. Impossible odds seem to be our specialty, Julian observed. Seems like, Nathaniel agreed, reaching across the table to steal an extra pancake from Elias's plate. Hey, marrow donors get extra pancakes. It's a rule. So do transplant recipients. Also a rule. They bickered good-naturedly, and Julian felt something in his chest expand. This was what he'd been missing while building his empire. The simple, profound joy of family. Of being needed not for what he could provide financially, but for who he was. His phone buzzed. Thompson, with the morning briefing. Julian glanced at it, then set it aside. Not important? Elias asked, noticing. Nothing's more important than this, Julian said, gesturing to the table. The boys, the moment. I've got good people running the company. They can manage without me micromanaging every decision. Who are you and what have you done with my father? Nathaniel teased. Your father learned some things, Julian replied. About what actually matters, about being present, instead of just being successful. Does that mean you'll come to my therapy session today? Nathaniel asked hopefully. Wouldn't miss it, Julian promised. That afternoon, Street Catherine's hospital. The physical therapy room was bright and encouraging, designed to help children regain strength. Nathaniel worked with Maria, who'd transitioned from nursing to helping with his recovery. 10 more steps, Maria encouraged. You can do it. Nathaniel, supported by parallel bars, took careful steps. His legs trembled with effort, but he pushed through. Elias watched from a chair nearby, unconsciously mimicking each movement, like he could will strength into his brother through solidarity alone. That's it, Maria cheered as Nathaniel completed the circuit. You're getting stronger every day. Can I try without the bars tomorrow? Nathaniel asked, breathless but determined. Let's see how you feel. But I think we're close. Maria helped him back into the wheelchair. You're doing remarkably well, Nathaniel. The transplant took beautifully, and your body is responding to treatment better than we dared hope. Julian watched from the doorway, his heart full. 3 weeks ago, he'd been preparing to lose his son. Now, he was watching him walk. Literally watching him take steps toward a future Julian had thought was impossible. Mr. Cross? Dr. Patel appeared beside him. Do you have a moment? They stepped into the hallway, and Julian felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Good news was usually delivered in rooms with chairs. Hallway conversations felt ominous. Is something wrong? Julian asked. No, actually, quite the opposite. Dr. Patel smiled. I wanted to tell you first. Before we tell the boys, Nathaniel's latest blood work shows full engraftment. The bone marrow has taken completely. His body is producing healthy blood cells. All his markers are in normal ranges. Julian leaned against the wall, needing support. He's cured? We don't use that word lightly in medicine. We'll need to monitor him for years. Watch for any signs of relapse or complications. But Julian, Dr. Patel's voice was thick with emotion. For all intents and purposes, your son is going to live. He's going to have a normal life. School, college, career, family, all of it. Elias's donation saved him. Julian couldn't speak, could only nod as tears streamed down his face. There's something else, Doctor, Patel continued. I've been thinking a lot about Elias, about how unlikely it was that we found him, about the odds of a homeless teenager being a perfect match for your son. 1 in millions, Julian managed. Exactly. And it made me think how many other potential matches are out there. Living on streets? In poverty? Never registered in any database? Dr. Patel paused. What if we changed that? Julian looked at him. What do you mean? I mean, what if we created a program, a mobile unit that went to homeless populations, shelters, underserved communities, and offered free bone marrow registry testing? What if we found the Eliases of the world before families were desperate? What if we gave them the chance to be heroes? Julian felt something click into place, a purpose beyond profit, beyond building empires, a way to transform his resources into something that actually mattered. I'll fund it, he said immediately. Whatever it costs, Equipment, staff, outreach, all of it. I was hoping you'd say that. Dr. Patel smiled. We can call it the Elias Initiative, in honor of the boy who proved that heroes come from unexpected places. He'd probably hate having it named after him, Julian said, but he was smiling. But let's do it anyway. That evening, the penthouse. Julian had ordered dinner from Nathaniel's favorite restaurant, Real Food, not hospital fare, spread across the dining table. They ate together, all four of them counting Lucky, who definitely got table scraps, despite Julian's previous rules against it. I have some news, Julian announced when the meal was winding down. Both boys looked up with identical expressions of curiosity. Dr. Patel told me today that Nathaniel's transplant has fully taken. You're going to be okay, buddy. You're going to live a normal, healthy life. Nathaniel's eyes widened. Really? Like, really? Really? Nathaniel turned to Elias, and without a word, they reached for each other, embracing carefully across the table. Julian watched them hold each other, the boy who'd been saved and the boy who'd saved him, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. Thank you, Nathaniel whispered into Elias's shoulder. Thank you for choosing me, for not giving up. Thank you for seeing me, Elias replied, for making me matter. You always mattered, Nathaniel insisted. I was just the first one smart enough to notice. They pulled apart, both wiping at tears, both grinning. There's more, Julian said. Dr. Patel and I are starting a program, a mobile registry unit, that will test homeless populations and underserved communities for bone marrow compatibility. We're calling it the Elias Initiative. Elias's mouth dropped open. You're naming it after me? You showed us that heroes don't come from penthouses and boardrooms. They come from streets and alleys and anywhere someone's brave enough to choose love over self-preservation. Julian's voice roughened. You changed our lives, Elias. Now we're going to help you change others. I don't know what to say, Elias whispered. Say you'll help us, Julian replied. Say you'll be part of it. Work with the outreach teams. Talk to kids who are where you were. Show them they matter before they're desperate to prove it. Yes, Elias said immediately. Yes, I want to help. Then it's settled. Julian raised his water glass. To new beginnings, to family, to impossible odds that somehow worked in our favor. They clinked glasses, water for the boys, wine for Julian, and drank to futures that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. 2 months later, the park. The autumn air was crisp and perfect. Golden leaves scattered across the grass where Lucky and Goliath, the massive Great Dane puppy they'd adopted last week, bounded together in joyful chaos. Nathaniel ran after them, no wheelchair in sight, his laughter carrying across the park. Elias jogged beside him, slower due to lingering hip discomfort but grinning wide. Julian sat on a bench nearby, watching them play, and felt a peace he'd never known during all his years of success. His phone buzzed, a text from Thompson. The board approved the expansion of the Elias Initiative. 10 more mobile units by year's end. You're changing the world, sir. Julian smiled and pocketed the phone. He wasn't changing the world, Elias had done that. Julian was just finally learning to use his resources for something that actually mattered. Dad, Nathaniel called, waving him over. Come play with us. Julian stood, leaving his suit jacket on the bench, and jogged toward his sons. Both of them. Legal adoption papers for Elias had been finalized last week. Elias Rivera Cross was now officially, legally, permanently part of their family. They played until sunset, painted the sky orange and gold. 2 boys and 2 dogs, and a father who'd learned that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in moments like these, in laughter and connection and the simple miracle of being together. 6 months later, the Elias Initiative launch event. The hospital auditorium was packed with donors, medical professionals, and members of the press. Julian stood at the podium, Nathaniel and Elias seated in the front row. 6 months ago, Julian began, I was given the worst news a parent can receive, that my son had 7 days to live. I had billions of dollars, connections all over the world, access to the best medical care money could buy, and none of it mattered. He paused, meeting Elias's eyes. What saved my son wasn't money or connections. It was a 14-year-old boy who had nothing except courage and compassion. A boy society had rendered invisible, who chose to be seen when it mattered most. Julian gestured to Elias. "Stand up, son." Elias rose reluctantly, uncomfortable with attention, but Nathaniel stood beside him in solidarity. "These two boys taught me something crucial, that we've built a society that renders some people invisible while elevating others based on arbitrary markers like wealth and status. But medical need doesn't care about those markers. Disease doesn't discriminate. The bone marrow that saved my son came from a homeless teenager living in an alley." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. The Elias Initiative exists to find the heroes we've been ignoring, to give every person, regardless of their circumstances, the chance to save a life. We've registered 5,000 new donors in the past 6 months. We've found matches for 12 patients who had no other options. And we're just getting started. Applause erupted, but Julian raised a hand. "I'm not the hero of this story. Elias is, and thousands of people like him, people with generous hearts and perfect bone marrow, who just needed someone to see them, to value them, to give them the choice to matter." His voice broke. "My son is alive because a street boy did the unthinkable. He gave everything when he had nothing, and in doing so, he saved not just Nathaniel's life, but mine too." Julian stepped away from the podium and pulled both boys into an embrace. The audience gave them a standing ovation, but Julian barely heard it. He was too focused on this moment, his arms around both his sons, his family complete, his heart finally full. 1 year later, Nathaniel's 9th birthday. The penthouse was transformed with balloons and streamers. Nathaniel's classmates from his new school filled the space with noise and energy. Lucky and Goliath wore matching birthday bandanas and accepted attention from a dozen children. Julian watched from the kitchen, where Elias was helping him arrange birthday cupcakes, a tradition they'd started, baking together every Sunday. "Think he likes the party?" Elias asked. "He loves it," Julian confirmed. "You did good planning this." "We did good," Elias corrected. "We make a good team." "We do," Julian agreed. Nathaniel appeared, dragging both his brother and father toward the living room. "Come on, we're about to do presents." The pile of gifts was substantial, but Nathaniel went straight for a small, wrapped box that Elias had placed there earlier. He opened it carefully and pulled out a bracelet, simple leather cord with a small metal charm. The charm was engraved, "Brothers by choice." "Elias made it," Nathaniel said, showing everyone. "Well, he had it made, but he designed it. There's two," Elias explained, showing his own wrist where an identical bracelet rested. "So we match. So everyone knows we're brothers, even though we don't look alike." Nathaniel threw his arms around Elias, nearly knocking him over. "Best present ever." "Better than the new bike in the garage?" Julian teased. "Way better than the bike," Nathaniel confirmed, not letting go of Elias. As the party continued around them, Julian stepped back and watched his family chosen, unconventional, born from tragedy, but thriving in love. His phone buzzed. Another update from the Elias Initiative: 20 matches found this month. 20 families who wouldn't have to face the despair he'd faced. 20 children who would live because someone had bothered to look in the places society preferred to ignore. "Dad," Nathaniel called. "Time for cake." Julian pocketed his phone and joined them. His 2 sons, his 2 dogs, this life he'd never planned but couldn't imagine living without. They sang happy birthday off key. They ate too much cake. They laughed until their stomachs hurt. And later, after the guests had left and the boys were cleaning up, Julian stood at the window looking out at the city, the same view he'd had when this all began. But everything had changed. A year ago, he'd been a millionaire who thought power and money could solve everything. Now he was a father who knew that the greatest wealth was love freely given, that true power was using privilege to lift others up, and that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought, only chosen. Elias appeared beside him, No longer the malnourished street kid, but a healthy 15-year-old who'd filled out, grown taller, found confidence. "What are you thinking about?" Elias asked. "About how lucky I am," Julian said. "How close I came to missing all of this because I was too focused on building walls instead of bridges." "You found me eventually," Elias pointed out. "That's what matters." "No," Julian corrected gently. "You found us. You saw a dying boy and chose to care. You gave us the chance to be better." "We saved each other," Elias said. "That's the truth. You and Nathaniel gave me a family. I gave you both a reason to be one." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk deepened. "Do you ever miss it?" Julian asked quietly. "Your old life? The freedom of not being tied to anyone?" Elias didn't hesitate. "Not even for a second. I spent 4 years alone and invisible. Now I have a father who sees me, a brother who loves me, and a purpose that matters. Why would I miss being invisible?" "You were never invisible," Julian said. "I just wasn't looking in the right direction. But I see you now. I'll always see you now." "I know," Elias said simply, and the certainty in his voice carried all the security he'd never had before. "I'm home." 5 years later, the Elias initiative had grown beyond anything Julian had imagined. 50 mobile units across the country, over 200,000 new donors registered, hundreds of matches found, dozens of lives saved. Nathaniel, now 14, volunteered with the program during summers, sharing his story with potential donors, giving hope to families facing what his had faced. Elias, now 19, had become the face of the initiative. He spoke at conferences, trained outreach workers, and spent his time finding the invisible kids he used to be, showing them they mattered. Julian had stepped back from day-to-day operations of his tech company, focusing instead on the foundation. Money still mattered, but only as a tool to create change, not as a measure of worth. They had dinner together every Sunday, the 3 of them plus Lucky and Goliath, now both fully grown. They told stories, made plans, laughed about the strange journey that had brought them together. One Sunday, as they cleared dishes, Nathaniel asked the question he'd asked before. "Dad, do you ever regret how things turned out? Like, wish you'd focused more on the company instead of us?" Julian looked at his sons, the one he'd almost lost and the one who'd saved them both, and felt nothing but gratitude. "Not for a single second," he said. "I built an empire thinking it would make me matter. But you two taught me that mattering has nothing to do with bank accounts or boardrooms. It's about showing up for the people you love. It's about using what you have to lift others up. It's about choosing connection over isolation, even when it's scary." "That's very philosophical, Dad," Elias teased. "Very unlike the guy who used to live on his phone during every meal." "I learned from the best," Julian replied, pulling both of them into a hug. "From a street boy who did the unthinkable, who gave everything when he had nothing, who proved that love and sacrifice matter more than money ever could." "Group hug," Nathaniel announced unnecessarily, since they were already hugging. They stood like that family by choice, bound by love and loss, and impossible odds that had somehow worked in their favor, and Julian felt complete. Outside, the city continued its endless dance. Children went hungry. Families faced tragedies. Invisible people waited to be seen. But inside this penthouse, 3 people who'd found each other in the wreckage of separate tragedies held on to each other and whispered the truth they'd learned, that the greatest wealth was love, that the truest power was using privilege to help others, that heroes came from unexpected places, and that sometimes the unthinkable was exactly what the world needed most. This story reminds us that we all have something valuable to give, regardless of our circumstances. What's one way you could use your unique gifts to help someone today? Let us know in the comments. Your idea might inspire someone else to act. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.